are the faint sounds of footsteps those of survivors. Back in 2001, a press conference was held in Tokyo by Capcom. This conference brought some admittedly shocking news for video game fans. Capcom producer and director Shinji Mikami came out on stage to announce that Capcom would be re-releasing the entire Resident Evil video game series on Nintendo's upcoming GameCube console. The shocking news came with the additional announcement that the rest of the series going forward after Code Veronica would be exclusive to the Nintendo platform. During the 5th console generation, Nintendo 64 sold a decent amount of units, but compared to Sony's PlayStation, it was an absolute failure. The PlayStation had sold over 155 million units in its lifetime, while the 64 sold just about 32 million units in its lifetime. Nintendo thought that the reason they experienced this financial failure was that at that time, they didn't really allow all third-party developers to make games for their console, and they refused to move on to modern disc-based storage for their games. Nintendo then struck up a deal with Capcom in acquiring their Resident Evil catalog and the rights to future titles. Since Resident Evil was an incredibly strong brand at the time for PlayStation, this deal seemed like a no-brainer for Nintendo, partially eliminating some of the competition with Sony. At this Tokyo press conference, Mikami announced that the first title they would release on the GameCube would be a full remake of the very first Resident Evil game. Mikami explained that he felt RE1 hadn't aged as well overall, like RE2, 3, and Code Veronica. With a remake in mind, Mikami believed that this updated version would be way more in line with his original vision than what they were able to accomplish on the PlayStation all of those years ago. The development of this remake began in 2001. Capcom Production Studio 4, the people behind Dino Crisis, would be developing this title with Shinji Mikami as director. Since this was one of the first GameCube titles developed by Capcom, the early days consisted of studying the console's hardware and figuring out how this powerful little machine worked. It didn't take very long for the dev team to find out just how powerful this console was. This inspired Mikami to really nail his original Resident Evil idea this time around. With this much more powerful hardware, the dev team would be able to do things with this game that were completely impossible in all other previous RE titles. At first, all of the environments were to be 3D rendered, like in Dino Crisis and Code Veronica. This ended up not working because the 3D environments the team had made were so ahead of their time graphically. It just wouldn't be possible to render all of this on the GameCube. Instead of decreasing the quality of the environments, the devs decided to go back to their old design method of using pre-rendered backgrounds. If you can't run it in real time, the next best thing is to take extremely high-quality pictures of it. The dev team ended up using the GameCube's power in a completely different way for this title. With the insanely good-looking backgrounds in check, this freed up processing power to have some of the best-looking 3D character models at that time. Real-life models were even brought in for reference in character creation. The idea of getting the most photorealistic look for this game was priority one. This idea of sticking to a photorealistic aesthetic also stretched into the game's environments. Not only does this title use pre-rendered backgrounds, but there are many effects layers that use things like particle effects and full motion video to create movement in every single environment. Originally, this game was only going to feature upgrades to the presentation and keep all of the same gameplay elements that players were familiar with in the original release. Believe it or not, but very close to the game's launch was when a lot of gameplay and environmental changes occurred. Mikami thought that if they just re-released a better-looking version of RE1, players who knew the original game well would see every scare coming. This new focus of changing gameplay mechanics birthed completely new scenarios not present in the original RE1. As you can imagine, with this new focus, the final stretches of development were rough. There have been stories of programmers having to work overtime for 2 months straight with no days off to meet the game's release window. At certain points, Nintendo was contacted for assistance on system knowledge and graphics limitations. Eventually, all of the game's problems were solved in time, with an insane amount of work and dedication from Production Studio 4. Resident Evil Remake was made in 1 year and released on March 22nd, 2002. What we got out of this game was something truly amazing. Resident Evil Remake, or as it's known by fans as just Remake, is my favorite video game of all time. I'm extremely excited to talk about everything in this game, and now that we have the development history taken care of, let's take another lonely step back into the world of survival horror. Before we talk about this game, I have to get something out of the way very quickly. When talking about Resident Evil Remake, I will simply refer to it as Remake, and the original I will call RE1, and RE96. Okay, let's get to it. So Remake features basically everything we got out of RE1 through Code Veronica, gameplay-wise. The game still uses tank controls, fixed camera angles, and as I mentioned earlier, pre-rendered backgrounds. There are a few features that didn't make the cut this time, like emergency evade and having the ability to use green herbs on pickup. Those small exclusions don't hurt this game at all. Remake retains the revolutionary 180 quick turn introduced in Dino Crisis and RE3, and is a very responsive control scheme. The light lock-on aiming is still here, and things like save rooms with item boxes and typewriters are still here too. Quality of life features like free movement on stairs, and there not being any load screens while moving between the floors of the mansion, make for a very enjoyable and polished gameplay experience. Just like in RE96, both of our playable characters, Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, retain all of their gameplay uniqueness that came with both of those characters originally. Jill starts with a larger inventory and a lockpick, and still exclusively gets the grenade launcher. Chris only has 6 item slots, starts the game with the knife, and still has to find the old key items to open certain doors just like in the original. This time, however, like Jill, Chris does begin the game with a permanent starting item, the lighter, just like Leon in RE2. The lighter comes in handy for some critical situations in this game that we will talk about in just a bit. I'm going to save specific character differences for later. Let's talk about some new stuff. In the first 4 RE games, there are a few ways you can tackle the standard zombie encounter. You can do things like carefully maneuver around them during certain animations, risking a potential grab, killing them outright and spending valuable ammo, or in RE3's case, try dodging out of their way, which barely ever worked. Remake does some pretty amazing things with its basic zombie encounters. So like in those original games, you can still do similar things to get around these undead creeps. Things like killing the zombie, once again spending ammo in the process, or muscling through, taking a bite but having to spend a healing item. With those basic actions, now comes some more advanced tech. This title does something interesting that I think RE3 was kind of trying to do with emergency evade, and that's baiting a zombie grab. Every zombie grab is telegraphed with a very clear lunging animation. If you're quick enough and have the reflexes for it, moving backward at the right moment during a lunge will make the zombie miss you completely, giving you a brief window to run past them. If mastered, this tactic becomes extremely useful for getting around zombies untouched and saving ammo in a big way. By the way, I do not recommend relying on this move if you aren't that skilled at this game. This is definitely a more advanced move that I recommend only doing if you're feeling confident or in a second playthrough. What I will recommend you do is use Remake's 4th zombie maneuvering strategy, that being the defense item. Defense items are new to Remake. As you explore the mansion and its surrounding environments, you'll be finding these sub-weapons lying around. These items allow you to break free from an enemy grab. Notice how I didn't say zombie grab. Defense items work against all enemies that grab hold of you. Both characters will find defensive daggers, and I should mention that daggers will not kill an enemy outright. They're best used to stun whatever enemy you're fighting and then slip past them. Each character gets their own type of defense item too. Jill has a taser that uses single-use batteries. The taser is powerful, but it won't kill a zombie with one charge, much like the daggers. Chris gets flash grenades, and these are probably the most useful out of all of the other sub-weapons. Chris will lodge a grenade into a zombie's mouth, giving you the opportunity to either let the grenade go off on its own or shooting it yourself, popping the zombie's head and killing them for good. Make sure you're a good distance away before pulling the trigger because Chris can get caught in the blast too. Defense items aren't infinite either, so using them carefully and sparingly is key to surviving the night. Defense items are the perfect addition to the survival horror formula. I love their inclusion so much. Not only do they allow you to correct the mistake of getting grabbed, but they also add a much needed layer of strategy in the standard RE enemy encounters that we're all used to at this point. Speaking of Resident Evil enemy encounters, all of the monsters from RE96 make their grand return in beautifully horrifying Remake detail. You got your zombies, zombie dogs, crows, hunters, and the Chimera down in the lab. All of these guys, for the most part, act the same as they did in the original game. Zombies do have a few new tricks up their sleeves, like being able to follow you between certain rooms. The hunters and Chimera have the most changes. The Chimera don't overwhelm you as much as they used to, and hunters will run at you and are faster than how they used to be. All of the bosses are here too, like Yawn the giant snake, Neptune the shark, Plant 42, the cave spider Black Tiger, and some new ones I'll be talking about later. The enemy design is great because it's mostly kept the same, but with a few very small balance and much needed gameplay changes. No enemy is annoying to fight against, and they're all terrifying in exactly the right ways. When I first played this game back in 2002, I noticed something strange about the zombies. After I killed one, left the room, and came back, I noticed that the bodies would still be there. This never happened before in the other games. I thought, oh, maybe dead enemies don't disappear anymore, you know, like an immersion thing. But dead zombie dogs did disappear. And about halfway through my first mansion visit is when I discovered something horrifying. Just after getting the imitation armor key, this happened. This, my friends, is a Crimson Head. So after killing a normal slow-walking zombie, an invisible clock begins to count down. See, a dead zombie is usually a good zombie, but in Remake's case, after a certain amount of time passes, whatever zombies you've killed will come back to life as horrifying, powerful, and very fast monsters. Crimson Heads have long, sharp claws that they use to swipe at you from a neutral or moving stance. These creatures can still grab and bite you as well, and their lunging grabs go way further than the standard zombie. Crimson Heads, in some cases, can even match your running speed, making for some pretty intense mini chases through the halls of the mansion. These guys are an incredibly overwhelming presence throughout the game. The one good thing about Crimson Heads is that because these creatures are basically super dead, dead times 2, they don't take a lot of damage before going down for good, making them more of a glass cannon type monster. This all might sound like an impossible threat to deal with, but thankfully there is a way to prevent Crimson Heads from waking up, by burning their bodies. So early in the game, you'll find a memo talking about zombies coming back to life, and how you have to either destroy their head or burn their body. Next to the memo is a canteen you can fill with kerosene. Using the fuel and a lighter together, you can burn downed zombies, removing them permanently. Burning zombies requires 2 item spaces if you play as Jill, since the lighter is treated as a regular item for her. This isn't the case for Chris because, as I mentioned earlier, his starting item is a lighter, so if you want to burn zombies, it's less of a hassle for Chris. I should also mention that using flame rounds with Jill's grenade launcher will also burn zombies on contact, so it's basically like a long-range projectile version of the lighter. I wouldn't recommend using your flame rounds on zombies though, they're best used on certain bosses later. Crimson Heads are brilliant. They're both challenging to deal with and really scary. It's another perfect gameplay addition that I really appreciate. Like, you can't just kill zombies recklessly anymore. They'll come back way stronger and much angrier. It's just another reason to get you to play carefully and conservatively. It's amazing. This game is so good, and I'm not even halfway through the video yet. It only gets better too. Besides general gameplay and the new basic item and enemy additions, Remake also reinvents most of RE96's original puzzles, and in some cases redesigns entire areas of the game. There are also completely new environments added in for returning players. I'll be doing things a little differently for this video. First, I'll be covering all of the new stuff gameplay-wise without going into the story. We'll cover the story and its changes after we analyze Remake from a gameplay perspective. So let's get to it. At the very start of the game, after investigating the dining room and encountering the first zombie, if you explore under the main hall staircase, you'll find a small set of stairs leading to an iron gate. Okay, we'll talk about what that is later. Everything that takes place after this is pretty much new content. If you play as Jill, the locked door leading to the L-shaped corridor in the art room is locked with the sword key. You might think that's normal, but in Remake, Jill's lockpick does not open sword key doors anymore. Jill has to find the sword key just like Chris does. Returning to where you found Kenneth's corpse, you'll notice a brand new door next to the mangled body. This door leads to a new area, the West Wing stairwell. Heading up the stairs brings you to the mirrored hallway. This place might look new, but it's actually an upgraded version of the rough passage from RE96. At the end of the mirrored hallway, you find a golden arrow with a removable head. After getting back to the main hall, I remember not knowing where to go for a few minutes. After finally checking my map, I was blown away to find out that this decorative wall at the top of the stairs was actually a door. Stepping through it brought me to a new place not present in RE96, the mansion's graveyard. Using the arrowhead on one of the gravestones opens a secret passage that leads very far down into a crypt. A very spooky crypt. On one of the walls is a set of 4 disfigured faces. Across from these faces is a steel coffin suspended from the ceiling. Under the coffin, you find a book with a key embedded on the back cover. It's the sword key. So this is how you gain access to the first few areas of the mansion. This is so incredible for returning players. You come into this game expecting to know exactly what to do, and then you're led down this entirely new and way more interesting path to get the first mansion key. It also perfectly sets up this game's new grounded and serious tone. You're not dealing with something entirely familiar anymore. You have to keep your guard up. As you explore more of the house, you'll discover a few more surprises. Walking down the L-shaped corridor, this happens. No doggies. After reaching the east wing and exploring the small library on the second floor, you find a few items that weren't here before: a dog whistle and a crumpled up memo. The file explains how one of the mansion's residents hid an item inside of a dog's collar around the west wing's balcony. Heading over there, we explore the new outdoors balcony. Blowing the whistle summons 2 dogs, one of which has a collar containing a false key. This key is used in a room called Death's Passage, a brand new puzzle where if you take the armor key from this pedestal, a nightmare suit of armor with spinning blades comes hurtling towards you. Replacing the real key with the imitation key nets us the familiar armor key. Once again, a much better and more interesting way to get another one of the mansion's keys. At this point in the game, it's funny thinking back to RE96 and how basic a lot of that game was with how you acquired certain key items. I'm not saying it's bad, but it really feels like Remake was the true vision they were going for originally. After using the armor key and getting into the greenhouse, we use the chemical to destroy the mutated plant monster blocking our progress, just like in RE96. Here we find one of 4 death masks. So instead of finding 4 crests to get into the courtyard, we have to find 4 death masks that fit one of each of those faces in the crypt, which, by the way, this happens when you slot in each mask. I played this game recently with a friend who isn't into Resident Evil, and they legit thought that there was going to be a vampire in the coffin. Pretty good guess. Getting each death mask is the same process as getting each crest in the original game, so completing those specific puzzles and fighting Yawn the giant snake. The portrait puzzle is almost exactly the same, but this time activating each portrait opens a shortcut into the graveyard and nets us another death mask. The armor room puzzle is a lot better too. You actually push the armor sets in the right order to open the wall to get another death mask. By the way, as both characters, Richard no longer dies when you get the serum for him, just before the first Yawn fight. He actually lives and becomes more of a character. In Jill's campaign, Richard even helps you fight Yawn with his own signature shotgun. After doing enough damage though, Richard sacrifices himself and pushes Jill out of the way of Yawn's death bite. Hey, at least you got Richard's really good shotgun out of it, right? Poor Richard. Interestingly enough, this doesn't happen when you're playing as Chris. Anyway, once you get all of the death masks and release the coffin, an ancient zombie awakens from probably a very long slumber. This is the Crimson Head Elder. The Elder is just a Crimson Head with more HP. It's a pretty straightforward boss fight. In the coffin, you find a crest that finally leads us to the courtyard. Heading through the roofed passage and into the garden shed, we discover a very different room from RE1's shed. This time, there's an alternate path that leads to an outdoor forest area. I will talk more about this in the story section of the video. Let's jump ahead a bit. Remake's guardhouse is very similar to RE1's. You explore each room that will either contain a few zombies or giant spiders. The most notable change here is the new and improved Aqua Ring. This is where we encounter Neptune and its baby sharks. And yeah, just look at this place. It's way better than RE1's water tank room. If you play as Chris, this is where Richard dies. He once again jumps in front of the mouth of a giant monster, saving Chris's life. Down here, we have to do this pretty intense puzzle where we have to drain the aqua ring, but Neptune is trying to smash through the glass of the control room that we're currently in. Hitting the switches and resetting the room's pressure in the right order finally drains the outside ring. This part is very intense. The robotic voice constantly reminding you how much pressure the room can take before collapsing in on you, while a nightmare shark is trying to get at you, is extremely nerve-wracking. It is honestly amazing what they did with this incredibly basic area from the original game. It's 100% redesigned. The only things the two areas have in common are the shark and the water. After draining the aqua ring, we head down to its bottom level. Here, amongst the chaotic and cluttered scenery, we have to pick up a key that is dangerously close to Neptune. As we try to grab the key, Neptune springs back to life and slams into the platform we're standing on, dropping the key into the water right next to the creature. Hitting the platform's generator switch overloads the generator itself. Man, that was really shocking. After frying the shark and grabbing the key, we head back to the guardhouse. As you'd expect, the Plant 42 boss is next. As Jill, you can choose to fight the boss or create V-Jolt and bypass it just like before. Plant 42, like a lot of things in this game, is way better than its original counterpart. This time, the room you fight the monster in has 2 floors. It shoots acid down from up above you and swings its tentacles wildly. If you go up to the 2nd floor, be careful because the tentacles can knock you down, inflicting a ton of damage. The original Plant 42, in my opinion, never looked like a plant. It looked like a weird alien to me. So this redesign makes more sense and looks amazing. The bulb opening exposing the core is gross too. After defeating 42, you get the helmet key and head back to the mansion. Just like RE96, this is where the hunters come into play, and you clean up whatever puzzles and objectives are left over here. On your second visit, the room where you'd fight Yon 2 is completely different. This time, it's a puzzle where the walls are closing in on you, and you have to push this statue into its proper place to deactivate the walls. Even though the purpose of this room is different, the hole in the floor that Yon makes from the original game is still here. Dropping into the hole leads us to the kitchen. No terrible director's cut music this time. We use the lift to get up to the elevator corridor, where we grab the battery for the courtyard's lift. Heading back to Death's Passage, we open the helmet key door there and find ourselves on the new 2nd floor of the library. As we walk deeper into the library, we're jumped by Yon again. This is Yon 2. I found this fight easier than Yon 1 because the room is a lot more spacious and you could get Yon wrapped around the main bookshelf and deal some good damage. After taking care of Yon once and for all, the snake knocks into the bookshelf where we find the wolf medallion that we'll use later. Now that we've completed the mansion, it's time to head back to the courtyard and head down into the caves. Now, in RE1, the caves were my least favorite area. Every room looked ugly and the same, and there were hunters all over the place. And there isn't an item box in the first area down here. If your inventory is full and you get to Enrico, you can't pick up the crank, forcing you to go all the way back to the mansion and drop some stuff off. It's a pretty terrible design decision. What's the first thing you see when you enter Remake's cave? A typewriter and an item box. Thank you, Mikami-san. So the cave is very story-focused, and I want to save my take on these events for the story part of this video. I'll say briefly that the cave is awesome. Every single room is structured differently, and they all visually look distinct. The cave just feels bigger than the original because of certain camera angles and the room's structure. The place just feels more fleshed out. You still have to fight Black Tiger down here, which is a cakewalk if you use flame weapons. Okay, I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit. At the end of the cave, we find the pieces of a crest, which, when combined together, are identical to the one we found in the Crimson Head Elder's coffin. Both of these crests fit perfectly into the iron door under the main hall stairs. What happens down here is a lot of story stuff, so I'm gonna skip over it. After a nice calming walk through the mansion's underground, we come up to the backyard of the mansion, where we find a giant fountain. Here we use the eagle and wolf medallions to get into the lab. Oh wait, hold on a minute. You know, the Umbrella Corporation's website is kinda weird. They can really do with a redesign. Speaking of websites, I've been in the mood to make myself a channel website for a while now. Thanks to Squarespace, I can finally do that in a simple, accessible, and fun way. With Squarespace, you can create your very own website. By selecting one of the many fully customizable templates, you can easily create a site about basically whatever you want. Want to create a personal blog or sell a product or something special like your art? How about some merch? There are resources for that right at your fingertips. And the best part is that all of the tools you need to make your site are provided by Squarespace. No need for any additional off-site plugins. It's super convenient. My Squarespace site is a blog right now, but I plan on making a full section dedicated to archiving the bios of every female survival horror character. I'd love for you guys to give me some suggestions on that list too. In my next video, I'll even do an update on this and shout out one of the suggestions. Squarespace is not only extremely useful for creating websites quickly, but it can be really fun too. You have the freedom to get really creative in making your site. And this is awesome because Squarespace is offering my viewers 10% off their first purchase. When you're ready to get serious, just go to squarespace.com/thespherehunter or click the link in the description to sign up and start building your online presence. That's squarespace.com/thespherehunter to get started today. I'd love to talk about making a better site for Umbrella later. Man, I wish we were on PS3, we wouldn't need to switch discs at all. The lab in Remake is visually amazing and extremely atmospheric. I thought the lab in RE2 did a really great job at making you feel small and overwhelmed by its mystery. Remake's lab makes you feel like you're in this tight, disgusting, forgotten place. It's so gross down here, and that's totally reflected in its enemies and environments. There are plenty of zombies down here like in the original game, but this time the zombies in the main O-shaped hallway don't respawn. I never liked that about RE96's lab. It always felt unfair coming out of a room and then instantly being grabbed by a zombie. The X-ray puzzle is still here, but gives you a different code for the computer to unlock the lab's doors. The most notable thing about Remake's lab is how you have to restore this place's power. So in the original game, when you went into the power maze room, all you had to do was hit a switch to restore the power. In Remake, you have to take this fuel supply capsule, fill it up in a different room, and then set it back in the power maze. The only problem with this capsule is that while it's in your inventory, if you run or get hit, the force generated from these actions will ignite the fuel, blowing you up in the process. So you have to walk back to the power maze carefully, and it's like one of the most intense parts of this entire game. Please make sure you kill every chimera in the power maze before walking this bomb back to its source. You'll thank me later. After resetting the power and activating the elevator, we head down deeper into the lab, and just like before, are confronted by Wesker. This time you actually enter the room with your partner character, then the cutscene plays out, instead of Wesker awkwardly meeting you outside of his lab. After revealing Tyrant in this insanely beautiful cutscene, Wesker is either killed or knocked out by his own creation. Just like before, Tyrant goes down very easily. After this, you save either Chris or Jill using the 3 MO discs, and finally escape to the heliport.
Jill!
You made it!
This time you actually have a partner if you've saved all of your fellow officers throughout the game. Tyrant is way more difficult here than in the original game. He takes more damage, and even when Brad drops you the rocket launcher, this can happen.
Jill, use it! Kill it, whatever it is!
Okay, looks like you'll need a second one. Eat this. And that's the end of the game. Those are most of the gameplay revisions and changes Remake brings to the table. This game improves on literally everything that RE96 gave us originally. What used to be simple gameplay scenarios and puzzles are now fully realized, exciting set pieces that are extremely fun to play through over and over again. The smaller puzzles like the armor key room, portrait hallway, and Death's Passage not only make more sense from a design standpoint in this remake, but also reward the player upon completion, whether you find a new key item, a valuable resource, or just a shortcut that leads back into the mansion. It's way more satisfying to play and very well thought out. It's a much more polished experience, and obviously what the devs wanted to do in the first place. From beginning to end, Remake has old and new players jumping and second-guessing themselves with its new scares and entire scenarios. It's all perfectly redesigned and reimagined. I like playing Jill the most, but in recent years I've grown to really enjoy Chris's campaign too. It's more difficult by default, but very rewarding to overcome. I play Chris when I want a challenge, and I play Jill when I want to do the perfect run. Now that we've talked so much about the gameplay, let's take a closer look at how Mikami and his team changed the story and characters to better fit the more grounded and darker tone of Remake's world. In Resident Evil Remake, the dev team wanted this game to be as realistic as possible in comparison to the first 4 titles. So the premise of Remake is exactly the same as RE1. You play as STAR's Alpha Team investigating the disappearance of Bravo Team in the Arklay Mountains. Alpha Team is once again overwhelmed by what they find in the forest and retreat to a nearby mansion. I have to mention, it is chilling seeing how Joseph dies in this version of the game. This whole intro is actually beautiful in its hopeless atmosphere and perfectly sets up the serious tone of this game's story. As you explore the Spencer mansion, you'll encounter a lot of familiar faces. Chris, for example, meets Rebecca when getting to Richard. Once you collect the serum for Richard, all three characters then return to the medical supply room where you originally met Rebecca in RE96. Richard actually stays in this room, recovering. I like this because when things are getting tough, you can visit him and relax for a minute. I think this is way more believable than Chris getting blasted in the face by Rebecca with pepper spray and then immediately shrugging it off like it's nothing. That was really funny, but I prefer how it's done in Remake. There's just way more substance and interesting character development going on here. Jill and Barry still have all of the same cutscenes together, and just like in RE96, depending on what you do first, only certain cutscenes and events will happen in your Jill playthrough. For example, not getting the shotgun early but then visiting Forrest outside still plays the cutscene where Barry finds Forrest. By the way, speaking of Forrest, this is what happens when you come to this area alone.
No.
I don't think I have to say this, but I'm going to anyway. This is a lot better than a few crows jumping out at you. Forrest does come back to life in RE96's Arrange mode, so this event isn't entirely original to Remake, just expanded upon. Forrest is a unique zombie, sporting a legit quick turn, like the STARS members, unusual speed, and a lunging grab that goes farther than any other zombie in the game, including Crimson Heads, believe it or not. It's interesting to point out that Jill appears on the cover of this game, and I personally think that her story feels like the canon story for Remake. Jill and Barry's constant interactions through the course of the game feels a little more fleshed out than Chris and Rebecca's adventure. I think a lot of that has to do with Barry being available more to assist the player in a lot of situations, but I also think his and Jill's interactions are very good. When you play Jill, it just feels like you're getting more of a story out of this title. When playing as Chris, it definitely feels like a second playthrough. You know, the type of thing where the game just lets you play more without the interruptions. Both campaigns are really good for those reasons, but as I said, I prefer the story you're getting out of Jill's game more. One of my favorite things about this game is its incredible amount of subtlety. There are some really great contemplative moments in the story. One of my favorite optional scenes is after you find the pool of blood in the dining room. If you try talking to Barry again, this is how the scene plays out.
Barry.
I love that so much. Barry doesn't have to say anything here for you to get what he's feeling. In that scene, it's obvious he's worried about his friend Chris, and he doesn't want to believe that this is his blood. When you finish the game and learn that Barry was working with Umbrella and Wesker the whole time, it sort of recontextualizes this. Like, Barry knows what's going on here, and he's staying quiet about it. It would have been so easy for the devs to put in extra lines of Barry expressing his worry about the situation. Him saying nothing says so much more. And that's why I love this tiny interaction. There are a bunch of other moments like this where the characters don't say anything, and you're supposed to go off their facial expressions and reactions to the situation. Obviously, Chris is worried about Richard's safety, but he doesn't have to say that verbally to us. We just know from how he's looking at his wounded friend. It's really good stuff that adds so much more to an already amazingly updated story. And speaking of updates, the voice acting and a lot of the writing has been completely overhauled in this game. This is where some of the changes come in with the story.
There are only 3 STARS members left now. Captain Wesker, Jill, and myself. We don't know where Barry is.
Man, that line gives me chills every single time I hear it. If RE96 was the equivalent of something you'd see on Best of the Worst, Remake is a $30 million Hollywood production. All of the voice actors in this game do such a great job with these characters. Our two leads, Chris and Jill, voiced by Joe White and Heidi Swan Anderson, are incredible. This is probably my favorite version of Chris out of all of the games. He's very matter-of-fact and has an older brother attitude when speaking to Rebecca, just like Claire when she took care of Sherry. I'm sure this was intentional on the writer's part back then, but now it feels a bit more fleshed out. Jill in this game shares a lot more in common with RE3 Jill over RE96 Jill. I'd say Remake Jill feels like a less experienced version of RE3 Jill, which is great because becoming the Nemesis Wrecker is what I'd expect from this character. Jill's interactions with Barry are great. Both characters play off each other very well. And of course, half of that is due to Barry's amazing voice actor, Ed Smaron. It's funny because Barry was the meme of RE96, like everyone still goofs on all of his lines. In Remake, Barry has probably the best performance out of everyone, and that's because his character goes through quite the journey. He's being manipulated by Wesker, doesn't know if his family is even okay, and has to lie and betray his close friends constantly. There are great moments of heartbreak and disappointment from Jill multiple times when Barry betrays her, and you actually feel it in these performances. And with that idea of betrayal in mind, that brings us to the man himself, Captain Wesker. Wesker is voiced by Peter Jessup, and I think he does a great job at playing this backstabbing villain. This is the only other time outside of RE96 where Wesker had an American voice. Wesker is very stoic and intimidating when he shows up. He's really good at lying and had me second guessing whether or not he was going to betray Stars when I first played this version of the game back in the day. I played Chris first, and in his campaign, Wesker shows up at a certain moment to help out, so I was totally tricked again when I got to the end. So all of this might sound perfect, right? They nailed all of the dialogue from the original. Well, that's not exactly the case with Remake. So hilarious lines like Jill sandwich, I have this, I have a rope here, and Chris, stop it, are all gone or rewritten to be a lot better.
Barry.
That was a close one. A second late, you would have fit nicely into a sandwich.
So for most of the game, the voice acting is amazing, but something weird happens when you reach the lab.
And unfortunately, I had to give up my lovely members of Stars.
You killed them with your own dirty hands. Wesker, you've become senile.
Jill and Barry together. In hell.
The voice acting kinda takes a dive in quality and almost goes back to RE96 levels. I think the reason for this was probably bad voice direction when they got to these lines, or everyone involved in the recording process just didn't know how to make these silly lines written by a Japanese person to sound good. I think it might be a combination of both of those because the voice actors are great, but for whatever reason, these characters end up sounding really weird at the game's climax. This doesn't take much away from the game. These lines just stand out awkwardly because up to this point, everything has been so believable and grounded in a realistic way. It's really strange, but I still love it for what it is. It seems like no matter how much you try to change Resident Evil, the camp will not go away. With all of that said, I still love and think the voice acting and the actors are awesome. There's one more thing we need to talk about with Remake's story, and this is actually exclusive content for this version of the game. In my gameplay analysis section, I skipped a few parts as to not spoil what I'm about to tell you. What I'm talking about is the story of Lisa Trevor. So let's go back to that iron gate under the stairs in the main hall. That curious moaning sound stuck out in my mind every minute I spent exploring the mansion on my first visit. When we get to the garden shed, there's an entirely new path here. Stepping through this door brings us outside. On this dark and muddy path, we get a staticky call from one of our comrades over the radio.
Barry?
Monster! James! Gun! Ineffective! It's it! Stay away! Forest outside mansion! Stay! Hey!
Forest outside the mansion, stay away. That doesn't sound menacing at all. After solving a quick puzzle and opening the gate to the other side of the mansion's graveyard, we step through and onto another dark wooded path. It's that sound again. This walk through the forest is one of the most atmospheric and tense moments I've ever experienced in a video game. It was strange the first time I played this because I had just heard an extremely creepy and very human sounding noise off in the distance. I was very relaxed on my slow walk through the woods. I wasn't really scared of anything at this moment. Thinking back on it now, there's something very unnerving about this. Like I expected to find another survivor out here or something. At the end of the path, we find an old forgotten cabin. Stepping inside, we notice the fireplace has been set recently. Someone has to be here. A monster can't do this, right? As we explore the cabin, we find an old family photo with a journal next to it. The contents of the journal are almost illegible, and it seems like it's been written by a small child. In the cabin, we find the square crank to clear the waterfall leading to the guardhouse. As we make our way back to the front door, we can hear something. When I first met Lisa, I was legitimately terrified. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This is clearly a mutated human, but not fully mutated. Like there's a person in there still. I tried my best to get past the monster, but she clipped me on the way out, doing an incredible amount of damage. I made it out and ran back through the forest to the garden shed. Just a few minutes earlier, I was expecting to find anything than what I'd just seen. My nice little forest walk turned into fearful sprinting. Fast forward to the caves after finding Enrico, we have to solve a new puzzle where we reactivate an elevator not seen in the original game. This lift takes us further down into the cave system. Barry conveniently meets us here and accompanies us down. Reaching the bottom, we hear Lisa's moaning off in the distance. Leaving Barry behind, we go ahead to investigate. After quickly running into Lisa and figuring out she's immune to basically all damage, we return to Barry, only to find him leaving us behind as he rides the elevator back up. We're left down here with an indestructible monster. Facing our fears and carefully getting past Lisa, we find ourselves in these odd underground living quarters. This place not only looks visually amazing, but it's also a total mess down here. Porcelain dolls litter the shelves, and there are chairs stacked up in this strange spire-like shape. All over the ground are faintly lit candles, too. This place seems very disconnected from the rest of the mansion, and to be honest, from reality. It's almost like someone was trying to lock something down here away for the rest of time. Exploring these living quarters further, we find another room through the flooded hallway. This room is better taken care of, and we find a key we need to progress, as well as another family photo with some notes attached. The note is dated November 10th, 1967, and it details administering the progenitor virus to a few different test subjects. The names included are Lisa and Jessica, and we learn that this Jessica person didn't survive these tests. The rest of the journal pages describe a sad story of Lisa looking for her mother after the tests. Lisa survived the progenitor virus, but her mother, Jessica, didn't. Lisa talks about finding her mother's face and attaching it to her own body, but it's not really her mother. She thinks her real mom is trapped inside of a box in a deep, dark place. Returning to the gate under the main hall stairs, we finally head through and see what's down here. We find a secret underground passage that brings us to a very strange altar with what seems like a bottomless pit down below. We also find Barry down here and...
Jill, you're alive. I was worried because I thought you were...
Start talking.
Calm down. I didn't want to do it. Believe me, I can explain.
Don't lie to me!
To talk. Jill, hand me my gun! Thanks, Jill.
This is the final encounter with Lisa, and instead of fighting her directly, we push these 4 large stones off the platform. Pushing each stone releases chains connected to the coffin in the center of the room. Inside the coffin are the remains of Lisa's mother. There's also one final family photo and diary entry. In the file, we read Jessica Trevor's final moments. She talks about how the men here have given her shots for her condition, but the more shots she gets, the faster it seems her memory is fading. This file is depressing. Jessica slowly drifts away, and all she wants to do is remember her daughter, who's been taken away from her. The final page is reassuring Lisa that the 2 of them will escape this mansion. This was dated 1967. This side story is so tragic. Lisa's been trapped down here for years, mutating into a monster, but not completely losing all of what she used to be. While her mother lost all of her memory before dying, Lisa can't really die and has to live with the trauma of what Umbrella did to her and her family on repeat. It's so terrible and makes you hate the Umbrella Corporation that much more. At least we were able to finally lay Lisa to rest and reunite her with her mother. I hope you guys understand why I wanted to tell this story separately. It's amazingly well integrated into the main story as well as the gameplay. Your first interaction with Lisa is interesting enough to get you invested in the game's optional files. And it also makes some of the older ones you've previously acquired make more sense, now that you know who Lisa is. The only other creature we've dealt with like this was William Birkin, but he infected himself out of greed and hatred. Lisa is a victim of circumstance. Lisa could have just been a cool new monster design that you fight throughout the game, but she ends up being so much more thanks to the great writing on the developers' part. Big shoutouts to all of the writing staff on Remake. You guys did a fantastic job with this game overall, and particularly with Lisa Trevor. The final thing we have to talk about with Remake is important to why its scares, world, and atmosphere are so effective, and that's its stunning presentation. This game came out 17 years ago and still looks better than a lot of modern games. I mean, it was the best looking game when it came out, and I want to say ever since it's come out. This is all thanks to, like I said at the start, the developers using classic pre-rendered backgrounds for the game world. Now, of course, some of the 3D assets have aged a little less gracefully as the pre-rendered stuff. Face models look great, but don't animate as well as they should, and there are definitely jagged edges around 3D models in some areas of the game. These downsides aren't really noticeable though, unless you're consciously looking for this kind of stuff. I personally think this game is still one of the best looking video games thanks to overall amazing art direction. Lighting and shadow play a big role in the visual presentation, and as I said earlier, particle effects and FMV layers are used in tandem with the backgrounds to create one of the most believable video game environments ever. The fixed camera's placement is also masterfully done. There are so many shots in this game that make you feel uncomfortable or like you're being watched. The angles looking through windows are some of my favorites. It's like Wesker is watching you from the shadows, or maybe something else. The Spencer Mansion is as much of a character as the STARS members are. I want to show you guys some of my favorite camera angles. Pay attention to all the moving elements in these clips. That's all FMV layers and overlay effects. It's so impressive for the time, and shows you how creative the devs were while making this game. Other than the effects, each and every room has been either redesigned or redecorated. In RE96, a lot of the rooms and hallways didn't have windows or any objects in them, making that title's environments feel a little barren and maze-like. Remake having very clear identifiable rooms does a good job at making the mansion feel real, but also helps you keep a very consistent mental map of your surroundings. By the way, remember when I said the devs had to switch to pre-rendered backgrounds because their 3D environments couldn't work on the GameCube? Well, there still is one fully 3D room in this game. Don't blink, you might miss it. The character animation is motion captured and it looks so real. There are so many little details that I love. Chris and Jill having different running and walking animations with the pistol is a really nice touch. It makes it feel like these characters have had different firearms training. And of course, like in RE3, both characters hold all of the guns correctly. No more pointing deadly weapons at the ground right next to their feet. Also, there are a few scenes where you can see the characters practicing good trigger discipline. It makes sense because they're cops. It's all so good, and I love it so much. The visuals aren't the only thing that sell this game's believability. The sound design is top-notch, whether it be the squishing, disgusting footsteps of a nearby zombie, a hunter screaming in your face, or just the sounds your gun makes. It all sounds amazing. The gunfire especially sounds loud and impactful when fired inside. There isn't much music playing like in some of the other titles, but what's here is very good. It really seems like the music has been carefully placed in each part of the game that makes the most sense. There are full rooms and hallways where you'll hear nothing but ambient noise until something comes crashing through a window. A lot of the tracks from the original release of RE96 have been remade, but there are mainly new tracks to keep you on the edge of your seat. The pieces of music in the east and west wings of the mansion's second floor are so haunting, and they actually change when you come back to the mansion on your second visit. Returning tracks like Rebecca's and Wesker's themes sound great remade, and of course, one of the best save room tracks of all time is in this game. Resident Evil Remake isn't just an amazing graphical update, but honestly, the best survival horror game ever made. From start to finish, you're getting an extremely polished gameplay experience, better told story, and new and refined takes on classic scenarios, puzzles, and monsters. If you haven't played this game yet and you consider yourself a fan of survival horror or Resident Evil, please go play it. There hasn't been a better survival horror game than this since it released. I am not kidding about that. The gameplay experience you're getting out of Remake is the most consistent survival horror title of all time. If you want to play Remake, you have a bunch of options. You've got the GameCube version, which in my opinion is the best. It's the purest form of Remake, and I just love playing it with a GameCube controller. Seriously, that little monster is the most comfortable controller to use on classic Resident Evil games. There's also a Wii port, which is just the GameCube version with cleaner resolution. An HD remaster was released a few years ago, and that version introduces quality of life changes for people who aren't fans of tank controls. That's right, the HD version has traditional analog control. So yes, you have no excuse not to play this game anymore. The HD version does suffer from some pretty bad looking pre-rendered backgrounds because, unfortunately, Capcom lost the source code for this game and had to salvage whatever assets they could, resulting in some ugly backgrounds in later parts of the game. There is a slight remedy to this problem though, in the form of the upscale background PC mod in development now. This mod cleans up a lot of the poor quality backgrounds on the PC version. By the way, Remake HD on PC also runs at 60 FPS, and it looks breathtaking. Whatever version you decide to play, you won't regret it. Once again, Shinji Mikami and his team at Capcom Production Studio 4 did a perfect job with this title. It's not only my favorite video game, but the last perfect survival horror title, in my opinion. Remake is what happens when some of the most creative, smart, and talented designers, artists, and storytellers in the video game industry come together to create something timeless. The fact this thing was made the way it was, it basically being crunched out of the door in a little over 1 year, is incredible to think about. That just goes to show you what a team with a real vision is willing to do to get survival horror perfected. Hey guys, thanks for watching. This video feels like everything my channel has been building towards for the past 2 years. If you got to this part of the video, thank you so much for watching and sticking with me on my never-ending journey to cover survival horror in the most loving way I can. I have some shoutouts for you all today before we wrap up. First up, I want to thank my lovely artist, Dross Art, for the new Susie Valentine avatar for this video. I really appreciate it, Dross. This video would not feel complete without you. Next, I want to throw some love at a friend of mine named Alex Aniel. Alex hooked me up with some exclusive development history on Remake. If you guys don't know Alex, aka CVX Freak, he's an awesome dude that's writing a book series on Resident Evil's entire development history. Please go follow him if you want to keep up with his future projects. Another big shout out to Mono Memory, who made some of the tracks for this here video. Please go check out Mono's channel. He makes amazing covers of RE music in a synth-pop style. His work is incredible. Please go subscribe to his channel. Last but certainly not least, a big shout out to my friend, Sunny Bauer, for helping me with some lore research. If you guys haven't seen Sunny's edits of RE cutscenes, you totally should. He fixes a lot of silly stuff that these games and movies do, and it's really awesome seeing more realistic, or in some cases, more accurate versions of classic Resident Evil events. But yeah, thank you, Sunny. I really appreciate your help. If If you guys liked this video, please consider subscribing and checking out my Patreon down in the description. On Patreon, I have some really fun rewards like an exclusive, more personal video series that I do called Inside the Sphere. It's a fun, relaxed, catch-up type show. Anyway, y'all, I'll be seeing you all in my next video. Once again, thank you all for watching. Later.
Say, buddy, you mentioned something about research for a story.
That's right. Got a tip that something big's happening.
In a nowhere little town like that? They sure didn't mention anything about it on TV.
Yeah, well, I'm freelance, pal. I don't make my living waiting for the TV to tell me what to cover.
What was that? The Army? Yeah.
Looks like taking a helicopter was the way to go. I bet they got all the roads blocked off by now.